We can't think of another organization like ours.
Welcome to the Service to Syndication podcast, where we interview the biggest and most successful real estate entrepreneurs, investors, capital raisers in the world who have worn the uniform of this great country, those who provide services to our men and women in uniform, and other service-oriented professionals to provide you with the tool sets, the mindsets, and the skill sets to help you conquer your dreams and goals in real estate and to use this wealth creation vehicle so you can live a more successful, happy, and fulfilled life of generosity and prosperity. If what you desire is time, lifestyle, and financial freedom, you've come to the right place. We will bring to you the best real estate entrepreneurs who will give you the insights, the knowledge, experience, skills, so you can go out and crush it in whatever real estate asset class you desire. So grab a pencil and paper, sit back, and enjoy the ride on the Service to Syndication podcast.
Hello, my servicemen and women and other service providers. Welcome to another episode of the Service to Syndication Real Estate Podcast. I am your host, Cedric Marlow. I am a U.S. Navy vet. Here on the Service to Syndication Real Estate Podcast, we interview the most successful real estate entrepreneurs, investors, capital raisers in the world, where most have donned the uniforms of our great country. We aim to provide the tool sets, mindsets, skill sets for you to achieve your personal and business goals while using real estate as a wealth creation vehicle to help you live a more successful, happy, and fun-filled life. Everyone, today I have with me Mr. Anthony De La Pelle. I am super excited to have him with us today. But again, before I properly introduce our exciting guest to you, I want to ask a favor of you. As always, please, if you get some value out of today's interview, if you get some type of insight, mindset shift, if you learn a new skill, new information, receive inspiration or motivation to go out and take some action and make some progress in your life, please share this episode with some of your friends. Send it to someone you know who might be or could be interested in real estate. Share it on your social media, post it on your wall, or share it in your stories. Help us spread our message while you help others. For all of you who share this episode, I want to say thank you. Again, everyone, we have Mr. Anthony De La Pelle. Anthony's law practice is limited to eminent domain, condemnation, redevelopment law, and real property tax appeals. He has fought the government for property owners in eminent domain and real estate tax appeal matters since 1987. Most people think that they can't fight the government, but he knows better. At McCurdy, Riskin, Olson, and De La Pelle, they level the playing field for their clients and make sure that they obtain just compensation if eminent domain is used to seize their property or that they are not paying more than their fair share of local real estate taxes. Anthony is the sole New Jersey attorney selected to be a member of Owners Council of America, ownercouncil.com, a nationwide association of leading eminent domain lawyers. Anthony is also the 2024 Global Chair of the Counselors of Real Estate, www.cre.org, and is certified by the Supreme Court of New Jersey as a certified civil trial attorney. All right. Anthony said a mouthful just now. So what I like to do is give my listeners, my guest, of course, about 75 seconds to kind of summarize, their real estate journey, and we can start to unravel all of that from that point on.
Well, thank you, Cedric. It's a real pleasure to be here. And the fact that you are a veteran makes me like you even more, even though you have a really good football team to root for in the Philadelphia Eagles this year, and I have a tough one this year with my New York Giants. So we can overcome that disparity today, and I appreciate the opportunity to be here. As you mentioned, I'm a lawyer, and I'm from New Jersey, so I hope people won't hold either one of those things against me. My law practice has been focused on the limited areas that you mentioned, so we represent almost all the time, we're representing property owners against the government with respect to matters where we can help save them money on their property taxes, or if the government takes their property by eminent domain, we represent them in those matters either to stop it if it's improper or to get them what we call just compensation for the taking. And in particular, at least in New Jersey, there are a lot of takings by eminent domain that are undertaken for the achievement of what we call local redevelopment purposes, where property is taken from one property owner and given to another to achieve some redevelopment. Because in a state like New Jersey and you know where you're based in Philadelphia, there's really not very much land left that can be developed that hasn't been developed already. The stuff that you see that isn't developed probably can't be developed, right? It's wetlands or it's steep slopes or it's got some other things going on. Maybe they don't have sewer service there, whatever it might be. So the land that could be developed probably already was, and then the transformation, redevelopment of those areas is how real estate development is achieved in urban areas in the Northeast and around the country. And it's a very big part of our practice. I've been doing it for 37 years now, and our firm just does that, and we represent people all over New Jersey. You mentioned that I'm part of two national organizations where if someone comes to me and needs help outside of New Jersey, I can get them in the right hands through a referral through one of the two organizations that I'm involved with, and confident that we can help people around the country if they have problems with real estate that we can help to solve. So again, my pleasure to be here, and I'm looking forward to our interview today.
Awesome. So can you share your journey into law and what drew you to specialize in eminent domain and real estate tax appeals?
Great question. Well, I went to college in Pennsylvania because I thought I was going to become a doctor, so I was a pre-med and had a little trouble with some of those science courses. I ended up deciding that I would go to law school. And while I was in college and in law school, I always had to have a job to help pay for tuition. And the jobs that I had focused on real estate, different aspects of real estate. So I learned a lot about it. My father was a real estate broker as well. So I kind of tagged along with him when I was younger. And when I got out of law school, I started working for a larger law firm. And one of the first big cases I worked on was what we call a regulatory taking, where a town adopted an ordinance which tried to limit the use of someone's real estate. And that was a significant case that got up to the state Supreme Court. And it taught me a lot about property rights and made me understand it from a different perspective because this country was built on freedoms. And we have a constitution, and attached to the constitution is something called the Bill of Rights. And the Fifth Amendment is number 5. We're number 5, right? Property rights are number 5. The founding fathers of the country recognized that it had to grow, and it would grow because of what we were offering people to come from other places. And we knew that to grow, we probably had to have the government grow too. And that included having government-owned properties. And if you already owned some property and the government needed it, there had to be ways in which the government could move forward with acquiring it, and the safeguards are right in the Constitution. You have to have two things to use eminent domain in the United States. Number one, there has to be public purpose, like for a road or a courthouse or a school or something like that. And then secondly, if there is a public purpose, the government can only take the property if they pay what's called just compensation, which is supposed to be the amount of money that will make you whole, indemnify you for the loss of your property to advance the public interest. So I got kind of turned on to that early in my career. And while I did other things, I represented real estate developers and zoning and land use matters early in my career. I did real estate transactions. This was the thing that really turned me on. And since the mid-90s, I've only been doing that. And I'm real happy about the fact that I don't do everything. I just do what I do and hopefully do it very well.
Now, what are the most common misconceptions people have about eminent domain and condemnation laws?
Well, my sense is that there are two big ones. Number one, many people don't realize that the government can take your property in most cases. And it's a very, very intrusive exercise of government power. It's probably one of the most intrusive exercises of government power. I think the criminal laws are probably the most intrusive because you can be deprived of your liberty by government, right? If you're found to be guilty of a crime, you can go to jail. I think the family laws are very intrusive because you can lose your children, right, in custody battles. And then I think the next one is property rights, which is what eminent domain is all about. It's really not very much fun for anyone that we represent when the government comes knocking on your door and they say they're going to take your house or your business property or your investment property or whatever it may be. But as long as there's a valid public purpose, they can. And our job is to make sure that our clients understand that the government can probably take the property if there is a public purpose and they're going about it the right way. So that's the first misconception. And it's hard sometimes for people to realize that that's just the way that the law works. So our job is to educate them on that, make them understand it, and make sure that the process treats them fairly. I think the second misconception is that, at least in both of our states, you're in Pennsylvania, I'm in New Jersey, in order for the government to use eminent domain, they're essentially buying your property. Okay, they're doing it involuntarily. But if you think about it, when you sell real estate, if you want to sell real estate to me voluntarily, I can say, hey, I want to buy your property. I'm going to offer you $100,000. If you think the property is worth $500,000, you can either say, no, I need $500,000, or you can tell me to go take a hike because you don't want to sell it. But when the government's going to buy your property, if they have the power to take it, you can't say no. So the misconception, because of that leverage that the government has, is that the owner who's selling the property involuntarily, when it's taken from them, they can say no. They probably can't say no to the taking of the property, but they can say no to the price. And the whole point of eminent domain lawsuits is to make sure that the property owners receive what's called just compensation to make them whole. So in my example, if your property was really worth $500,000 and the government offered you $100,000, they're going to come and give you a real estate appraisal and say, hey, we have an appraisal. It says your property is worth $100,000. It's done by a certified appraiser. That's our offer, right? You can reject it and then go to court and get your own appraisal. And if it's really worth $500,000, hopefully a jury ultimately will agree that the fair price is $500,000, and that's what you get. So the second misconception is that you don't have to accept the government's offer, that there are ways that you can fight the government. You can fight City Hall and end up with a fair price. And in both of our states, ultimately the price for a taking by eminent domain is determined by a jury of your peers, not the government. They don't decide it. Okay, in other countries, the government might get to take your property and the government gets to decide what you get. In the United States of America, that's not the way it works. In most states, juries decide how much you get, not judges. Because some people think that judges are part of the government, and they are. It's a different branch of government. But to have a jury of your peers decide what your property is worth is one of the ways that we make the process fair. And we try to help our clients get over that misconception that they can fight City Hall and they can get a fair outcome. And the entire purpose of the proceeding is to put you in a position where you would have been if you wanted to sell your property, even if you don't want to. If you wanted to sell it, what would it be worth? We can figure that out and then hopefully get you that in the eminent domain process.
Okay. So you've kind of given us a glimpse of what eminent domain is, but can you just, I guess, give us more of a textbook definition of eminent domain? And I know you said, we can go and fight it, but, what real rights does a property owner have, when faced with that?
Power of eminent domain is the government's power to take private property for public use. And some of the classic examples I mentioned are they want to build a highway through your house or through your yard. They want to build a new city hall, a library, a school, police station, things like that, firehouse, right? All that kind of stuff. That is the exercise of eminent domain is the power that the government has to take your property and put it to public use. And the law requires that if that happens, because the public is benefiting, you don't have to pay. In other words, you don't have to donate your property or give it up for less than its fair market value because it's benefiting the public. The public has to pay as a whole. What happens then is that the power of eminent domain is exercised through a lawsuit called a condemnation lawsuit. Condemnation is the process by which eminent domain powers are utilized. And the condemnation lawsuit has two purposes. The first is to confirm that the government can, in fact, take the property because they are achieving a public purpose by taking it. And then once that happens, then there are different procedures in place to determine or how the price is determined, the just compensation is determined. In most states, there are two different levels of how the compensation is determined. One is more of a preliminary review. In my state, it's called a condemnation commissioner hearing, where the court appoints people that are not involved in the lawsuit to preside as arbitrators and decide how much the money is. I think Pennsylvania has the same process. And then if that does not result in an outcome that's satisfactory to both sides once they award the price, let's say in my example, government offered 100,000, you wanted 500, and the commissioners awarded $275,000. In that instance, both parties might not be happy because the government only wanted paid 100 and you wanted 500. So you could appeal that and bring it to court and then have a jury trial and let the jury decide it. right? So there's two moments in time where the compensation amount is looked at or determined by different kinds of parties or people in the lawsuit. And that's essentially the way it works. For any government agency to exercise eminent domain power, there needs to be legislation that authorizes that. So we always look to see if they really do have that power or not. And then one of the other things that is a little unique about eminent domain is that sometimes there are private companies that can use eminent domain. That mostly affects utility companies, electric companies, gas companies. Sometimes there are cable and internet companies that might have the power of eminent domain. It's in their statutory authority, and they can exercise eminent domain. One example involved in both of our states. There is a gas pipeline that runs down from upstate New York that takes natural gas through Pennsylvania into New Jersey that is then used for energy production. And those kinds of companies can exercise eminent domain. Their ability to use eminent domain is regulated by utility agencies that are government agencies. So they make sure that the private company is using the power properly. And the reason why we do that, it's kind of part of our American spirit. The government shouldn't be in the energy business if private parties can do it better. Whether the government's going to have an electric company or have a private electric company run electric companies, probably better to have the private company do it. So because that's a recognition in many states that the private utilities can provide public service, they also can have eminent domain power as well.
Okay. Now, what are some of the most challenging or notable eminent domain cases you've worked on, and what made them stand out to you?
I think there are probably two different categories that I can describe for you and your listeners. One, which is something that might not seem that complicated, really is, and that is something as simple as a highway widening where they have to add another lane or redo an intersection. In those kinds of projects, the government is usually only taking part of someone's property, not the whole thing. Losing your entire property may be very disruptive and unpleasant for most people. It's actually a lot easier to figure out how much you're entitled to because you just have to figure out what the property's worth, right? And you go to the market and you see what people are paying for properties, or if they're investment properties where there's income being produced. Real estate appraisers can take that income stream and use a formula called a capitalization formula to figure out the value of property, and that's what you get. But when they take part of your property, you not only have to look at what the value of the part of the property that's taken is, you have to determine whether taking some of your property affects the value of the rest, even if they don't touch the rest. So let's say you owned a shopping center on a state highway, and it had 2 rows of parking in front of the stores, and they had to widen the highway, and they take one of your rows of parking. Do you think the shopping center is going to attract the same quality of tenants if there's not enough parking there? Right? What do you think about that? So that shopping center is probably worth less money. So we don't just look at the 12-foot wide strip of land that's going to become a new lane on the highway and figure out what that land is worth. We look at the shopping center's diminished value. It's probably going to produce less rent. It's going to get vacant more, right? It's going to be more risky to own, so it's worth less. And the difference in value between what you had and what they leave you with is how you calculate just compensation. So that's a really complicated exercise that most people don't ever have to deal with, but you do in partial takings cases. So that's the one thing that I think is really difficult, and it happens all the time. The other one is something that's very prevalent in most urban areas, especially in my state and in New York and also in Pennsylvania, in the cities, is the use of what's called local redevelopment laws to redevelop property using eminent domain. There was a very significant case that was decided in 2005 by the United States Supreme Court involving property in New London, Connecticut, where the city, it's on the Long Island Sound and on I think it's Connecticut River, the city of New London. They wanted to revitalize their city, so they attracted a large pharmaceutical corporation, Pfizer, to come and build a new headquarters there. And then they decided they would take advantage of that and try to revitalize the area around the headquarters. And they took private property, including homes, to turn them over to other private parties to build a hotel and apartments and stores and things like that. And most people don't think that that's a public use because someone else is profiting off of it, right? So that case got to the Supreme Court in 2005. It was called Kelo, K-E-L-O versus New London. And the court held at that time that the states are allowed to adopt laws which would allow the takings of property for redevelopment purposes. It's up to each state to determine. And since that case, many states adopted new laws prohibiting the use of eminent domain for private redevelopment. In New Jersey and New York, it's still allowed. So we have quite a bit of that work. And what makes it different is not just that the ultimate use of the property is not a traditional public use, because in my state, redevelopment is allowed to eliminate blight. blighted conditions. So they're saying they're going to eliminate blight, and that's the public purpose. But what's different about it is that the end user is a private party. They pay for it. And it's not your tax dollars that pays for it. It's some private developer that comes in and pays for the cost of acquiring the real estate. And then they go build what they're going to build and provide economic incentives and benefits and jobs and all these things that are considered to be public benefits. So what makes them different is that the developer who's paying for it is probably not going to do it unless they can make a profit. So the Department of Transportation comes along and they are going to take your property, build a highway. They're not there to make a profit. They're there to build a road. Whatever it costs, it costs. And then your taxes pay for that, right? In a redevelopment taking, it might not happen unless the developer can make a profit. Because why are they going to invest money to lose money? So that, in our experience, has caused those cases to have a lot more problems because it's more likely that the offer that the government is going to make, because the government is partnering with the private developer in those instances, the offer they're going to make you is going to be lower because there's an incentive to buy it lower so that the developer can make a profit. And those cases are very, very emotionally charged, and they do end up in litigation quite a bit. We've had a variety of them. I just had a trial involving a case like that where it's a large industrial property in central New Jersey, government in a 25-acre property. The government initially offered $1.7 million, and we obtained a $26 million jury verdict. So think about the difference there. I've had cases where the government and the redeveloper offer the owner less than what they paid for the property a few years before that. Think about that, right? You're a real estate developer, an investor. You go and buy property, and maybe you buy a couple old smaller houses and you assemble them, and you just relocate the tenants, and then you have a big piece of property you want to develop with an apartment building, let's say. Let's say you put $4 million into that, and the government comes along and wants to take it so someone else can put the apartment building there, and they offer you $2.2 million, and you already got four in it, right? That can happen. And that's the kind of case where people really need to have experienced counsel to walk them through it, to make sure that they are treated fairly, that the outcome can be in their favor and they can receive a fair price, whether it's 4 million or 5 or 3.6. I'm not here to talk about that right now, but I do think that the dynamics of those redevelopment cases can be much more distressing for property owners and investors.
Okay. Now, have you seen any recent trends or changes in eminent domain laws that property owners should be aware of outside of the Supreme Court 2005 ruling now, where different states have made it a little bit harder for the redevelopment purposes to come into play?
I think that's the main one. I think the anti-redevelopment legislation after 2005 is the main series of changes in eminent domain laws around the country. If there's another category of issues, I would suggest to you that the utility takings are on the upswing, because we're always looking for more sources of energy as technology advances, right? Renewable energy has different needs than the traditional coal-fired electric plants or water-powered electric, generating plants. And those instances are probably going to result in an uptick of the use of eminent domain. The gas pipeline project that I mentioned to you that we recently were involved with was the result of fracking, right? Where they go in and do some stuff underground to release the natural gases. Then they have to move that gas to where the manufacturing operations are to turn it into energy. So that's out there. And then the last thing I think is really just the last 2 years. There's a lot of uncertainty in the real estate market, as I'm sure you and your listeners are aware, because of the change in the debt markets. And I don't know how the changes in the outcomes of the elections are going to affect the debt markets in the future. I don't know if anyone really knows. I know economists can talk about it, but I think that uncertainty has affected the way in which the government is moving forward with some of these projects, so that there may not be any significant predictability as to what's going to happen, other than we are starting to see the signs around the country of the Biden Infrastructure Act. A lot of money went into that, and Congress approved a lot of expense. So many of the eminent domain lawyers around the country got their first experiences in the 1950s and 60s when the Eisenhower Act came through and they built interstate highways, right?
Yeah.
We're now going to have another wave of that, and it's not always roads. There's a broadband aspect to this, where there's a lot of money in the Infrastructure Act to provide better broadband capabilities to users, because we use broadband, right? And they may result in takings. And that will be utility companies for the most part. So that's where I think we're headed, aside from the redevelopment work, which, in the back of the napkin way of looking at that. Anywhere that's already been used and developed for commercial industrial purposes, there's a good chance that those uses will transform over time. The old factories aren't going to continue as old factories. They're going to be repurposed. Maybe they're going to be knocked down. The office market obviously is one sector where office buildings, at least around here, are being knocked down and they're building new stuff on them. They may involve eminent domain. And then the last thing that I will say about this is that I think you will see around the country an increased use of eminent domain to provide more affordable housing, because we have such a great shortfall of it, not just here in my state, but everywhere. And the incentives that the government may create to allow the private sector to come in and partner with it to do projects would provide some affordable housing may result in the use of eminent domain as well.
We know you're going to like this episode, so please like, comment, and subscribe to this channel so you can be notified when the next episode drops.
Okay. Yeah, I mean, there's a huge shortage of affordable housing. And like you said, not just in your state, it's just all across the country. I mean, especially here in the Philadelphia area, we've seen rents go from where people are used to paying $700 to $1,000 for, say, a 3-bedroom home. And now that home may be $2,000, just the same exact way in apartments as well, where you see the same thing, where people are used to paying a certain amount, but now the prices have gone through the roof. So I definitely think that will be something that we'll start to see, because there's, with that lack of affordable housing that's out there. Yeah.
Right. So is the solution to the problem going to involve having the government become more aggressive in acquiring property so that affordable housing can be provided? It's probably a public purpose, probably. I don't know if it always is, right? It depends. So every state has the ability to provide legislative authority to its agencies, whether it be state or municipal agencies or county agencies, let's say, or regional agencies, to do whatever it is that they're charged with the responsibility of doing. It might be that you'll start to see more use of eminent domain to provide affordable housing, whether the government ends up owning the affordable housing or not. It might be privately owned, but there may be some laws that allow government agencies in certain states around the country to use it more for those purposes, because we all know we need it. There's no question about it, as you've said.
Yeah. In the process of challenging a condemnation from challenging an eminent domain action, is there a difference?
Not really, because it's the condemnation power involves the government's use of its eminent domain power.
Okay.
So that's the legal premise of a condemnation case, is that you're determining whether the government can use its eminent domain power. The condemnation is the actual action to take the property by eminent domain.
Got it. Okay. So are there any tips or strategies for property owners who are trying to dispute a condemnation claim?
I think the most important thing for anyone who has this happen to them is to get in the right hands of people to help you. I mentioned earlier, this is all we do here. And there are not a lot of lawyers who are very experienced in this. So it's really important that you find one that can help you and that knows the process, because the processes are unique from state to state, and they tend to be different from regular court processes. Like in my state, we have a special set of court rules. We have a different way of litigating eminent domain cases than any other kind of civil case. And if you're just a really good lawyer, a really good real estate lawyer, you may not have done an eminent domain case. That's something that you need to take into account, because the government will have lawyers who are experienced in this. You want to make sure you've got the right team. Something as simple as real estate appraiser, which is probably required in almost every eminent domain case, at least any that goes to court. You want someone who's done one of those before, not someone who just writes appraisals for banks for loans, right? Because think about the instance I gave you of that partial taking with the shopping center. Unless you know how the law works, you might not know how to do the appraisal for the partial taking, which requires essentially looking at those impacts, and it's a different kind of analysis. And then finally, at least in states where you have a jury trial, you can have the best expert witness in the world from a technical standpoint, but they know how to explain things in common sense words. Their delivery in court is going to be way up here, and it may not be something that the jury is capable of understanding. So if you have a really technical issue, sometimes we use engineers, professional engineers or professional planners in our cases. They have to be able to explain things in a very common sense way. And that's really important. And the lawyer that you hire, if they're experienced eminent domain, they're going to know that. They're going to know who should be on the team with them.
I know you've already kind of went over like the redevelopment portion, but what legal challenges arise when governments or developers try to develop areas, and how do you help navigate those?
So in most states, process for redevelopment starts at a local level, like in the town or the city, and they're going to actually do a study to determine if the area that they're looking at qualifies under their law to designate it as an area in need of redevelopment or a blighted area. So from the get-go, people who own those properties are going to get notified or should be notified of what's happening. They should have experienced counsel there because you may be able to prove that the area doesn't qualify so you can keep your property. And then another event that's important is if the area is designated to be a redevelopment area and eminent domain is allowed, which is, again, it's not permitted in every state, but in my state, it happens quite a bit. The city's ability to designate a third party as what's called the redeveloper is an important moment because it may not be you, even if you own the property. So knowing how that works so that you have the best chance of keeping your property and actually receiving the benefits of the redevelopment project, which are that you can get different kinds of zoning, and there might be some financial incentives to own it, like tax abatements and things like that. It can be a good thing if you want to keep and develop your property for it to be in a redevelopment area. The bad happens if they're going to take it from you and not allow you to realize the benefits of the project, which can make it an attractive site for an investor.
Okay. All right. So outside of, my property taxes going up, are there any other reasons why a property owner may file a real estate tax appeal?
Sure. Obviously, if your property is overassessed, you shouldn't be paying more than your fair share. And just like with eminent domain, you need to have people on your team that know how to work the process and understand it because it's another unique process in different states. Something as simple as if you're complaining about your property taxes being too high and you file an appeal, if you haven't paid your taxes, they can throw your case out of court. So even though you may have paid too much, you have to have paid it and then you get a refund if you win. That's one rule. Another one is if you have an income producing property in my state, I think other states have a similar process. The tax assessor sends you information asking you to provide your income and expense information on your commercial property and you don't respond, and then you file a tax appeal, they can throw it out if you didn't respond to the tax assessor's request, which came probably 6 or 9 months before you filed your appeal. So you got to be on the lookout for that kind of stuff. And then there are other issues relating to exemptions for nonprofits, for other qualified entities. We have something called a farmland assessment program in New Jersey. A lot of people don't know there are farms in New Jersey because they only see the stuff near the airports in New York City, but there are farms. And if you have farming activity, you qualify for a tax break. Senior citizens get tax breaks too. So there's other kinds of issues that are involved in property tax appeals. And then something that's happened in recent years in my state that I think has happened around other parts of the country, sometimes the town or the city will file its own appeal to raise your assessment if they think that the market is showing a lot of appreciation and you have to defend it. So if warehouse property during the pandemic, right, became a lot more valuable and they may have tried to raise the assessment there. So there you're on the defensive. Those would be the most common ways in which a tax appeal process is utilized.
So can you explain the process of appealing a real estate tax assessment, like step by step?
In many states, there's different places you can appeal your taxes. In my state, it's either the county level or the state tax court level. The smaller cases generally go to the county and the bigger cases go to the tax court. The dividing line here is the assessment has to be more than $1 million to go to the tax court directly. So if it's under $1 million, you got to go to the county first. That's an informal process, but there's a deadline to file your appeals every year. In most cities in New Jersey, it's April 1st. There are deadlines that are different times of the year in different states. You got to meet that deadline, right? But once you file it, whether it's in the tax court or the county tax board, they'll schedule a hearing. It's like a little trial. And you can produce a real estate appraiser to help you. Sometimes people just go in. If it's a house, they might file it and then bring in comps like a realtor can give you, right? Especially if it's a condominium and there's a lot of sales in your complex, it's pretty easy to show that if your condo is assessed at 500, but all your neighbors sold them for 400,000, you might be overassessed, right? And then you have a hearing. And in the county level, if you lose, you can then appeal to the tax court and go up to the tax court where you get a hearing. It does take time. The county cases can get resolved within the first 6 months or so after they're filed. So by the fall, there's a good chance that case is going to get resolved at the county level. The reason for that is that they affect the budgets of the towns, and the budgets are set in the summer. So the state has set up a system in New Jersey that gets the appeals administered quickly so that the impacts on the budgets can be more readily dealt with, and it works pretty well. But a larger case, one that's in the tax court, can take several years. And there are mandated court rules of documents that have to be supplied in those cases, and you have to go through that before you can prove it. But one of the main things that needs to be understood about tax appeals, other than these procedures for the timing of the filing of the case, is something called an equalization of the assessment. So, and it works a little differently around the country, but many states don't always assess the properties or reassess them every year to reflect market changes. They use something called an equalization ratio. So because it costs a lot of money to do a reassessment, you have to pay a company to go out there and figure out how every property's value has changed in every property in every town in every state of the country, right? Why should your tax dollars be paid to hire a company to do that when there's other ways to take it into account? So in my state, what they do is they figure out how the market has changed generally, and they use something called an equalization ratio to determine that assessment that might have been laid upon a property in a prior year, what value does it represent today because of the market changes. So if the market values are increasing, like for single family residential as they have been over the years, it's not uncommon in many towns that the assessment itself may not have been levied that year, may have been levied 3, 4, 5 years ago. And maybe the market value has gone up 30 or 40% or 50% since then. It might have, if you're fortunate, that's great, right? Good for you. In those cases, the ratio is going to account for the difference. So I've had clients in these market changes come to me and say, you did an appeal for my neighbor, and my house is assessed at $600,000, and I think it's worth $700,000. So I'm good, right? I'm not overassessed. It's worth more than the assessment. Then I said to him, you know what? In your town, they haven't reassessed properties in a while. And there's something called an equalization ratio. And the ratio says that the properties are assessed at only 70% of their market value because of the changes in the market. So what you got to do is you take your 600,000 and you divide it by 70%. And it means that the market value of your property that's represented by that $600,000 assessment is $857,000. I just use my calculator to do that. I'm not smart enough to, right? So you're overassessed. I'm like, wow, I never knew that. And we might save them in a heavily taxed state like mine. I mean, your property taxes aren't low, but they're lower than ours generally. Yeah. That might save those people $10,000 a year to reduce their assessment. And they don't even know because they think that their assessment is fair because they think the market value is higher than the assessment. But what really matters is the market value higher than the equalized value of the assessment, which is a formula that's not really hard to do. You could do it. I could tell you how to do it. You have to know it's there. And that's why you need to have people that work for you that understand how these things work so that you know whether you're overpaying your fair share.
Okay. So is this equalization ratio, how does that differ from the millage rate?
The millage rate concerns how you take the assessment and then figure out how much you owe in taxes. That's the tax rate.
Right.
So let's say the millage rate or tax rate is two per thousand, right? So a $900,000 house is going to have $18,000 of property taxes because it's $2 per thousand of assessment. The equalization ratio is how you translate the assessment into market value. The millage rate is applied to the assessment to figure out how much you pay in taxes, not what the represented market value of your property is. So that's how they're different.
Okay, gotcha.
And by the way, as you might imagine, the equalization ratio is not the same in every town because of two things. Number one, the market values may be different from town to town. And secondly, the towns may not have done the baseline level assessment on the same year. I have in one county in New Jersey, Union County, which is close to New York City, close to Newark Airport. Actually, part of Newark Airport is in a city called Elizabeth in Union County. I think the equalization ratio there is like 10 or 11% because they haven't reassessed properties in years. So if you got a $400,000 property and the equalization ratio is 11%, let's figure that out right now. It won't take long. Divided by 0.11. That means that your assessed property at $400,000, according to that number, it represents a market value of $3.6 million.
Whoa.
Because you're dividing 400 by 11%.
Yeah.
When you divide by percentage, the number goes up, right? I learned that in high school math. I started to take math in college and I didn't do too well, so that's why I'm a lawyer. Going back to your earlier question.
Wow. Well, hopefully, no one from the government in Union County will hear this.
It's public knowledge. I'm not giving any secrets away, other than there's this process and you got to know it. And a lot of people might not think they're overassessed if the property assessment feels lower than the market value, but that doesn't necessarily mean that the assessed value is the market value because of these formulas that are used to get you to the point you're comparing apples to apples.
Yeah. Up until today, until you mentioned it, never heard of the equalization ratio.
They may be called different things in different places. And, some states, they can reassess you if you buy your property at the assessed value, at the purchase price. Not in my state. They don't do that. That's called the spot assessment. We're not supposed to do that here in New Jersey. Other states, they do it that way. So there you're probably going to have a current value. You're going to have to figure out what it is. You look at the market, you see what the comps are, and you figure it out, and then decide if you're overassessed.
Yeah, I'll say for commercial real estate, especially multifamily, it's definitely like that in Texas. Texas is definitely one of those states that I know upon sale, they reassess it based off of, that purchase price and, going into their formulas. So, yeah, I totally agree with you on that.
But, the main lesson is it's different from state to state. Not something that most people know or expected to know. So you got to get somebody on your team that helps you understand it, that is familiar with that. And my main recommendation to people is to get them in the right hands. If you're going to go get a surgery, right? Don't you want the right doctor to do the surgery?
Well, absolutely.
You want to go to your general internist if you need brain surgery?
Not at all.
So it's the same kind of a thing. I'm not saying what we do is like brain surgery. They're much more talented and smart than we are, but we know how to do what we do, and there are other people around the country that can help your listeners in these pursuits.
So now, what should a property owner do immediately when faced with eminent domain action or tax assessment they believe is unfair?
Find somebody that's experienced in the field. Maybe even if you have a lawyer, ask your lawyer, do you do this? If not, can you find me someone that does this, right? To help you through the process. If you know a real estate appraiser, you can start with them. They might be able to help point you in the right direction because appraisers work with people like us, right? Get help. I don't think you should try to navigate it on your own. Maybe if it's your house and you understand real estate market values, you might be able to, go through a real estate tax appeal process on your own. But I don't like situations where people are representing themselves, even really smart people, even lawyers, even real estate brokers and appraisers. They don't necessarily know the procedures, and you can get burned by them. And then you're left holding the bag, and that's not a good thing. Then the government's getting your money when they shouldn't have it.
Yeah, definitely. We all want to keep as much as we can legally.
That's the goal, isn't it?
Right. Yeah, absolutely. So, Anthony, are there any situations where you advise property owners not to pursue legal actions? And if so, why?
Yes. I may discourage a client from trying to fight a taking if I believe that they will be unsuccessful. I think it'll be a waste of their money. I may encourage a client to take a deal that's been offered to them by the government, whether it be an eminent domain case or a property tax appeal. Because at the end of the day, in New Jersey, I believe it's this way in Pennsylvania, I'm not 100% sure. When you have one of these situations occur, you have to pay your lawyer, but the government doesn't pay your lawyer. So if you can get out of it fairly without having to pay a lawyer a lot of money, probably the right move. Some states, counsel fees are part of the mix. In New Jersey, for an eminent domain case, you only get your lawyer's fees paid for if you stop the government from taking your property, because they've abused their powers. But if they're taking your property, you got to bear your own expenses. Think about that. If you have your property, you go along, you're on, minding your own business, government wants to take your property. The goal is to make you whole, to give you as much money as you would have made if you sold it without a taking, yet you got to pay a lawyer and a bunch of expert witnesses to get there. You're going to end up with a net that's lower. So one of the first things we'll do is to analyze if the client can fairly resolve it right away, or if they got to go to the mat. And sometimes you have to fight. And if you do, at least you've exhausted the opportunity to try to resolve it quickly.
Okay. How do eminent domain and redevelopment laws impact commercial real estate differently than residential real estate?
I think the main way is that it can take time for the process to be completed. And in many cases, during that interim period, the prospect of the taking creates a cloud over the property, which makes it difficult for the owner to continue to lease or to use. If it's your house and they're going to take it, it takes 5 years, you're just going to live there until they take it. But if it's an investment, would you sign a long-term lease on a property that's subject to an eminent domain case?
Of course not.
Right. And would you invest money in fit up for a commercial property that might be taken in a year or two?
Not at all.
So I think those are the ways that they really can impact folks, and they need to be mindful of that there is something called a blighting influence of a cloud of condemnation, because it can take a long time for the issues to get resolved that may affect you. You may not be able to pay your bills if you own the property. You may not be able to pay your taxes, your property taxes, or your income taxes. You may not, because that was the income that you got. And then you lose a tenant, right? You had 3 tenants in your building, you lose one. Are you going to go to the market with your broker and try to find a good tenant? Sure you are, but is that good tenant going to come when they know that the property might be taken, or that it might lose half the parking lot in 2 years? So those are the things that need to be looked at very carefully for commercial properties. The most important things, I think.
So, Anthony, before you became this very successful person I see in front of me, give our listeners a little bit of your backstory, like where you grew up, how was your upbringing, what in your past shifted your mindset into becoming the person you are today?
Well, I was born and raised in New Jersey. I used to like to play sports, but then I realized I wasn't that good. So I focused a lot of my time. I read a lot. I learned a lot. First, I read about sports because I love sports. Right? I read a lot, got into history. I'm a middle child. I have 2 sisters, and my grandparents were all immigrants. 3 of them came from Italy, 1 came from Portugal, and they didn't really speak very much English. They came over in the 1920s, but they still didn't speak English. And I was born in the 60s, so shows you how communities, around our country kind of were populated and grew. We had this community around us. I think, some of the defining things for me was both my parents worked, and I saw their work ethic. My dad was a veteran in the Army. That mattered to me. And, we grew up in a time where we were the first people in our families that went to college, but we didn't have a lot of money. So I always had to have a job. And even my law school choice and way I did it, I went to school at night because I needed a job during the day to pay for tuition. And that really, I think, it framed me in who I became. I always was involved in volunteering my time to help others, and been very active in a bunch of different nonprofits over the years. And the thing that's behind me right now is a professional organization that's essentially a nonprofit that I've been leading this past year, which is an important organization to me. We just spent a week, actually, our organization, the Councils of Real Estate, several of us just spent a week in a Midwestern town in Southern Indiana, volunteering our time to help a small city with a blighted area to figure out we used our real estate knowledge to help the city. We met with the mayor and the council people and all the constituents and stakeholders and tried to help them find a way to get better. So that's always been really important to me. And, now that I'm getting older, I have 3 children. My wife and I have been together for 43 years. We have 3 grown children. One of them's married, and we're looking forward to the next phase of our lives. Maybe try to slow down a little bit at work and spend more time with family, and hopefully have some grandchildren, soon. And that's what it's all about. I mean, work is means to the end. The end is to have a good life, and I'm trying to figure out how to do that while I can still do my job well and help people. And I think the way in which I fell into this practice area really mattered to me is that I really felt that I could make a difference in helping people when they thought the government was taking advantage of them. And it doesn't mean the government is bad. It doesn't mean sometimes it is. But just the process by which government handles itself can result in inequities to people. It could be based upon their income, their race, their ethnic background. Could just be, to me, just because you were in the wrong place at the wrong time, you own property, right? So that's been very important to me, and it's helped shape my career very much.
Okay. So now the counselors of real estate, you guys come up annually with the top 10 issues. Can you briefly discuss that?
Yeah, sure. So as I mentioned, this year I've had the privilege of being the chairperson of the Councils of Real Estate. The organization is a global organization. We have about 1,000 members around the world. Our members are all in the real estate business, but there's about 60 different professional disciplines involved. So it's not like the professional planners have their association, or this is multidisciplinary, and it's really a very unique thing because we strive for excellence in what we do. You have to be invited to be a member, and we believe we have top people in every real estate profession, every profession within the real estate industry around the world. We have 27 regional chapters. My chapter, New Jersey, is one of them. And we have a variety of different initiatives. One of them that I mentioned earlier, the volunteer initiative, is called the Consulting Corps, where we volunteer our time for a week to go help a nonprofit or a city or a town or another government agency or school with a real estate problem. Another one is that we have a bunch of publications that we put on our website for free, and we do webinars on various real estate topics that are all available to the public. at no cost. Our website is cre.org, and you can find all those there. The one that you just mentioned about is something that's been kicking around. I think it's year 12 or 13. It's called the Top 10 Issues in Real Estate. We have a committee that's appointed every January. It spends the first half of the year figuring out what they think the top issues in real estate are, given their own experiences. And that committee is made up of our members. They are professionally and geographically diverse. So we get all walks of life essentially in the room thinking about this. They'll then identify a variety of different issues and trends in real estate and send a survey out to the rest of the members. So there's about 1,000 people who then provide comments. And then all that stuff is digested, and then the committee decides what the top 10 are. The top 10 issues is released every fall at our annual convention. We just had our convention in New York City at the end of September. And then that is delivered to our constituents and our clients in a variety of ways. It's on the website, erie.org, top 10. It's right there. There's actually a couple different presentations that are there available, and there are documents that back up each of them. So if you need research on a topic, you can go to our website, look at the top 10, and then there's a PDF that summarizes the whole thing. And then within that, there are links to information like articles on it. One of the top 10 issues this year, as an example, is something we started to talk about, and that's the office vacancy issue. The world has changed, at least in this country, as to how offices are used. And there's a lot of underutilized offices. So what happens with those? How does it affect a lot of things? How does it affect the prices of offices to buy, capitalization rates that are used by investors, the lease prices that are paid, right? If you want to go and rent an office building and you're a tenant, this is the best time to do it because there's a lot of supply and no demand, right? Which means the prices are going to come down, right? And then what happens to the rateable base? Because we talked about tax appeals. We have a client who bought a $40 million office building for $10 million.
Wow.
What's going to happen with that rateable? And then can the town make its budget and pay the police and the teachers and the fire people and the administrators and the people who plow the roads and clean the streets? That's one. The big issue, number one this year, think about the timing of it, was because we were delivering this at the end of September, was the global and United States elections. 70 countries had major elections this year. A lot of them saw changes in the governments that run those countries. Wouldn't that have an impact on real estate? Something as simple as what happens with tariffs, right? If you're going to charge countries more to import goods, are the ports going to be as busy? Will other real estate be affected by it? We thought that if the Democrats won, and I'm not taking a political position because it's not what I do, but if the Democrats won, they might change the 1031 real estate like-kind exchange mechanism. I don't know if the incoming government will change it in different ways to make it more useful. I don't know. We'll see, but you have to watch that because they make the law, and the law affects the real estate market. Something as simple as the Federal Reserve and interest rates. While the president doesn't control the Fed, the president's policies might guide the Fed, and that might guide interest rates, which might guide borrowing rates, which will affect real estate. So our top 10 is a great resource. I encourage your listeners to take a look at it. We have a publication called Real Estate Issues, which is a peer-reviewed journal, which has articles on all this stuff written by professors and economists and PhDs and people in the field like me, right, that are on the street doing this stuff every day in the trenches. There's stuff there that you can find that'll answer your questions. And you can also find access to our members who are there to help you. Sometimes they do it on a volunteer basis. Sometimes you hire them and you pay them. It doesn't really matter at this point. The key is to know there's all this information out there. And I can't think of another organization like ours that has that many different professional disciplines devoted to real estate. So if you need someone who's a commercial lender or a broker or an appraiser or a lawyer or an architect or a professional planner or an asset manager, right, or an economist, they're part of the organization. And that's a really, it's kind of a best kept secret in real estate. But over the years, I think people have started to learn more and more what we're all about. And I'm really thrilled that I had the chance to be at the helm of the organization this year. I learned a lot about real estate. I learned a lot about our members. I think it helps me be better at what I do. And at the end of the day, I decided to cap off the year, 2 weeks ago with this visit out to Indiana to help a small city I'd never been to before. And I hope that our findings will help them. We have a report that we've delivered to them and given some recommendations as to help their city.
Yeah, I definitely employ my listeners to go to CRE.org because I've never heard of it. However, the top 10 issues in real estate is something that I definitely want to dive into to see exactly where the professionals within the industry see things in real estate, thereby it's going to definitely help us become better investors, better real estate professionals by knowing the issues that others see and just further us along the way. So one, thank you for bringing that up, and definitely for, you guys having your footprint in the real estate industry.
Well, I'm happy to have had a chance to talk to you about all this stuff this morning, and I always appreciate the opportunity and get to know folks better. And I hope that I've provided some information or value to you and your audience.
Yeah, you definitely have. Well, Anthony, it has been a blast having you as our guest today. As we close out, please tell our listeners where we can learn more about you, get in touch with you, and learn about all the fabulous things you have going on right now.
I think the easiest place to find me is just on our website. It's real easy. It's MROD. It's McCurdy, Risk and Olson De La Pelle. MROD.law. Go on there. You can find stuff about me. Kind of, if you need help falling asleep at night, you can read about me. We also have blogs, one for the eminent domain practice, one for the property tax practice. You can subscribe to that. There's a lot of good information there. So when a new case comes out, a new issue is published. We published a blog post this morning on property taxes. Good information there, and happy to help people whenever they need it. And as I said, if between the council's real estate organization and the other one, the Owners Council of America, which you mentioned earlier, that's eminent domain lawyers, one per state. I'm our New Jersey rep. If you have an eminent domain problem in any state in the country, let me know. If it's not my state, I can find you a very, very qualified lawyer to help you. So, again, I really appreciate the time to be with you this morning.
Awesome.
Enjoyed it very much.
Awesome. Anthony, again, I want to thank you for your time today and all the wisdom you have provided to our listeners. It's greatly appreciated. And I want to thank you, our fans, for tuning in to the Service the Syndication Real Estate Podcast, where we want to provide value to you in your investing business. Please tune in to our next episode where we will interview another fantastic investing professional. See you next time.
Thanks for listening to the Service to Syndication podcast. We want you to know that we love and appreciate your support, and we are grateful about being a part of your journey to becoming a successful real estate entrepreneur. Please share this episode with a friend who you think will get a lot out of what you just heard. Send it to someone who you know is interested in real estate and dreams of having it all and being the best they can be in all areas of life. And if this was really valuable, share it on your social media stories and timelines. Thank you for watching and listening. Now go be great.